Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're tackling Nassim Taleb's The Black Swan. It's a book that, really challenges how we think about randomness and prediction.
Yeah, it's fascinating how much we, try to fit the world into these neat little boxes when
Mm.
in reality, it's those unexpected events,
Mm.
the black swans that really can kind of reshape everything.
Yeah, it definitely seems like one of the big takeaways is that we kind of have this obsession with the bell curve,
Mm.
but it's not always the right tool for every job.
What Taleb, I think, really highlights is how often the bell curve falls short, especially in areas that are really complex and interconnected.
Right, so things like financial markets, political systems, anything where one unexpected event could just have these huge ripple effects.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about like how analysts try to use the bell curve to predict market fluctuations.
Hmm.
But those models completely miss those rare extreme events like, the '87 stock market crash or the 2008 financial crisis.
Mm, right, right. And that 87 crash is a great example because, Taleb was actually working as a trader then, and he
Yeah.
talks about like walking home that day and just watching everyone going about their business
Yeah.
as if nothing had happened, even though the financial world had just like been turned upside down.
And that's the thing. Like they not only defy prediction,
Yeah.
but they also have a much bigger impact than we can anticipate.
Right.
And they really force us to reevaluate all of our assumptions.
That's both fascinating and a little unsettling, honestly. I mean, if we can't rely on past data or those traditional models, how do we make decisions? Do we just like have to surrender to the chaos?
Not necessarily. Instead of trying to predict and control everything, Taleb argues for building systems that are what he calls anti-fragile,
Hmm.
um, meaning, they can withstand and even benefit from disruption.
Anti-fragile systems. Now that's a thought-provoking concept.
Mm.
Can you give us an example? How do you actually like build something that gets stronger when something unexpected happens?
Well, one way is to, embrace redundancy just like nature does. I
Hmm?
mean, think about our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Two lungs, two kidneys, even extra copies of some genes.
Okay.
These redundancies help us to survive even when one part fails.
So it's kind of like, having a spare tire in your car. You might not need it often, but when you do, you're really glad you have it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in a world, full of potential black swans, the goal isn't really to eliminate risk entirely, but to manage it in a way that allows you to adapt and even thrive.
That makes a lot of sense. So it seems like understanding randomness isn't just this abstract concept,
Right.
but it has like really real implications for how we make decisions in our lives.
Absolutely. And one of the most powerful tools for navigating this unpredictable world is understanding the limits of our own knowledge.
And Taleb actually calls this epistemic arrogance, which is basically just overestimating what we know and underestimating what we don't.
Hmm.
It kind of reminds me of that analogy of a private library. The more books you have,
Yeah.
the more you realize how much you actually don't know.
It's a great point. And we see this play out all the time, especially with experts.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to put a lot of faith in economists or political analysts or even doctors. But they can be just as susceptible to these illusions of certainty as anyone else.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. So Taleb, he talks about the story of Giacomo Casanova, who was, the legendary seducer who survived all these risky situations, duels, escapes, prison. He did it all,
Right.
basically.
Well, and because of that,
Desperate.
he had this belief that he was somehow immune to danger
Yeah,
because he had this incredible run of good luck.
blinded by his own success.
Yeah.
He was ignoring the role of randomness.
It's like the story of the turkey, right? Who feels safe and secure every day and has no idea that Thanksgiving is right around the corner.
So we're hardwired to look for these patterns, even when they don't exist.
Yeah,
It's a sobering thought.
it is.
But if we're constantly trying to fit these random events into these neat little stories, then we're going to miss the bigger picture, right?
You've hit the nail on the head. Yeah. I mean, we could end up making some pretty bad decisions if we ignore that role of randomness. So, if we can't predict the future with any degree of certainty, then how do we make these decisions that minimize our exposure to those negative black swans, but also stay open to those positive ones?
That's the million-dollar question. And I'm guessing Taleb has some thoughts on that.
He does. And one of his key ideas is what he calls the barbell strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, it's inspired by weightlifting.
A barbell strategy. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So In weightlifting, this strategy involves focusing on the two extremes.
Okay.
You lift very heavy weights occasionally,
Mm.
but then engage in very light activity most of the time. And Taleb suggests we can apply this same principle to life in general.
So you're saying we should have like those stable foundations, those safety nets, but also be willing to, take risks, explore new opportunities.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between security and exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
Protecting yourself from the downside while staying open to those potential upside surprises.
This is starting to click for me. It's a different way of looking at risk and reward. Instead of chasing like this steady stream of small, predictable gains,
Yeah.
it's more about being prepared for those big, unexpected opportunities, but also those negative black swans that could like throw us off course.
Precisely. It's about acknowledging that, we can't control everything, but we can control how we respond to the unexpected. And Taleb actually puts this into practice with what he calls his extremistan barbell lifestyle.
Wait, he actually lives this way. I have to hear more about this extremistan barbell lifestyle.
Well, he incorporates both extremes into his routine. He'll go for these long, slow walks, but then he'll do these really intense sprints,
Okay.
grueling, random weightlifting sessions mixed with periods of rest.
So it's like he's intentionally introducing these stressors and variability into his life to make himself more resilient.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that he actually reports significant improvements in his physical and mental well-being after adopting this seemingly chaotic approach.
That's pretty compelling. It sounds fascinating. It's a little unconventional. But how does he decide which risks are worth taking and which ones to avoid?
That's where his concept of what he calls the fourth quadrant comes in. It's a framework for categorizing decisions based on the level of complexity and the potential impact of black swans.
Okay.
Understanding which quadrant a decision falls into can really guide your actions.
This fourth quadrant sounds like it's like key to everything we've been talking about. Can you walk us through it?
Absolutely. But I think it's important to keep in mind those stories of Casanova and the Thanksgiving turkey.
Yeah.
They highlight the dangers of ignoring those black swans, even in seemingly familiar situations.
Those stories definitely drive home the point. I'm ready to learn more about this fourth quadrant and how it can help us navigate this uncertain world.
All right, I'm ready to unpack this fourth quadrant. It sounds like we're venturing into some pretty uncharted territory here.
You could say that. Yeah, the fourth quadrant is where things get really interesting and potentially dangerous. It's the realm of high complexity and complex payoffs, where traditional models and forecasting methods just they break down.
Because the potential for those black swan events is so high.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These are the areas where we're most likely to be, blindsided by randomness and make decisions based on flawed assumptions or incomplete information.
So what kind of decisions are we talking about here? Give me some real-world examples.
Think about predicting financial markets, political upheavals.
The long-term impact of emerging technologies. These are all highly complex systems with interconnected parts and the potential for, huge unpredictable swings.
So, like, the butterfly effect reigns supreme in the fourth quadrant?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I see what you mean. Those are some pretty high-stakes scenarios, but I'm guessing most of us don't spend our days making billion-dollar investment decisions or advising world leaders. How does this fourth quadrant thinking apply to, like, everyday life?
That's a great question. The principles behind the fourth quadrant can actually be applied to almost any decision where there's a significant degree of uncertainty. I mean, choosing a career path, starting a business, even deciding where to invest your savings, these all have elements of the fourth quadrant.
So basically any decision where the future is not just unknown, but potentially, like, unknowable.
Exactly. And in these situations, the key is to, shift our focus from prediction to preparation. Instead of getting bogged down and trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen, we should focus on building systems and strategies that can handle a wide range of outcomes, both positive and negative.
That sounds a lot less stressful than trying to predict the unpredictable. But how do we do that? How do we prepare for something that we can't even foresee?
Well, remember that barbell strategy we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
That's one way to navigate the fourth quadrant. It's about having a solid foundation of stability. Things like savings, strong relationships, a diversified skill set.
Right. Those are all things that can kind of help us weather a storm, so to speak.
Right. And at the same time, being open to taking calculated risks, exploring new opportunities, and being willing to pivot when the unexpected happens. Things that might seem unconventional, but have the potential for, outsized rewards if they pay off.
So it's about finding that balance between prudence and audacity,
Hmm.
not being reckless, but also not being so risk averse that we miss out on potential opportunities.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the key insights from the fourth quadrant is that it's often better to avoid making big, irreversible decisions when the potential for those black swan events is high.
This reminds me of the example Taleb uses about the writer who gets a book contract to write a biography of Salman Rushdie, and he
Yeah.
assumes Rushdie's popularity will stay high, so the book's going to be a guaranteed success.
Right, a classic case of underestimating the fourth quadrant.
But then public interest in Rushdie just fades and the project flops.
Oh,
Ouch. Yeah, that's got to sting. It sounds like he made a big bet on a single outcome in a very unpredictable environment. What could he have done differently?
instead of putting all his eggs in one basket, he could have diversified his projects, maybe written articles or shorter pieces while working on the biography,
Okay.
kept his options open.
So the lesson here is to have a portfolio of smaller bets rather than going all in on one big gamble.
Precisely. And that applies to more than just business decisions, right? Think about career paths. Instead of trying to predict the perfect career, it might be better to experiment, gain experience in different fields, see what resonates.
Right, right. That takes the pressure off, trying to figure out your entire life plan right out of college.
Yeah, yeah. And
Right.
even if one path doesn't work out, you've still gained valuable skills and knowledge that you can, apply elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's a hallmark of anti-fragility.
So the fourth quadrant is about recognizing those areas where prediction is unreliable, and instead focusing on building adaptability and resilience. It's not about avoiding risk altogether,
Yeah.
but about managing it intelligently.
Exactly. Now, we've been talking a lot about the fourth quadrant, but I think it's helpful to step back and look at the other three. Taleb's framework actually divides decisions into four quadrants based on the complexity of the system and the payoff structure.
Okay, so the fourth quadrant is like the danger zone where those black swans roam free. But what about the other three? Give us the quick tour.
Sure, sure. Let's start with the first quadrant. This is where things are relatively simple and predictable. Think of tossing a coin or playing roulette.
Okay.
The rules are clear, the outcomes are limited, and we can use probability to get a pretty good sense of what's likely to happen.
So this is where those traditional statistical models actually work.
Exactly. But even in the first quadrant, we can't completely rule out surprises.
Right.
Just because something is statistically unlikely doesn't mean it's impossible.
Right. Even a fair coin can land on heads, 10 times in a row. It's just highly improbable.
Exactly. And that's why it's important to have some level of risk management in place, even in, seemingly simple situations.
Okay, makes sense. So what about the second quadrant? Where do things start to get a little more complicated?
The second quadrant is where we encounter more complex systems, but the payoffs are still relatively straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Think of things like insurance or managing risk in a casino.
Mm-hmm.
The underlying systems can be, quite complex, but the outcomes are well defined. Either you have a claim or you don't. Either the house wins or it loses.
So in this quadrant, those statistical models can still be useful,
Yeah.
but we need to be mindful of their limitations.
Right. And we have to be cautious about using past data to predict future outcomes,
Okay,
especially when those systems are constantly evolving.
got it. So that leaves us with the third quadrant.
The third quadrant is perhaps the trickiest of all. It's where we have simple systems but complex payoffs.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure I follow. Give me an example.
Imagine you're trying to predict the success of a new book. The act of writing and publishing a book is a, relatively straightforward process, but the potential outcomes are incredibly varied.
Right, because it could be a bestseller, it could be a total flop,
Yeah.
or anything in between. There are so many factors at play. It's hard to predict.
Exactly. And there are countless variables that contribute to a book's success, the quality of the writing, the marketing campaign,
Right.
cultural trends, even just plain luck.
So in this quadrant, it's almost impossible to predict the outcome with any degree of accuracy, even though the underlying system itself is relatively simple.
You've got that's why in the third quadrant it's often better to focus on the process
Okay.
rather than obsess over the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Do your best work, put it out there and see what happens.
That's a great point. It's like that old saying, focus on the journey, not the destination.
Yeah.
Exactly. And even if a particular project doesn't achieve the level of success you were hoping for, you've still gained valuable experience that you can apply to future endeavors. That's the beauty of embracing a process-oriented mindset.
Okay, so to recap, we have the first quadrant for simple systems with simple payoffs, the second quadrant for complex systems with simple payoffs, the third quadrant for simple systems with complex payoffs, and then our old friend, the fourth quadrant
Yeah.
for complex systems with complex
A
payoffs.
perfect summary. And the key takeaway is that each quadrant requires a different approach to decision making. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. It sounds like it all comes down to understanding the nature of the system you're dealing with, assessing the potential for those black swan events, and then adjusting your strategies accordingly.
You've nailed it. And that's why understanding randomness and the limits of prediction is so crucial. It gives us the tools to navigate an uncertain world with more confidence and resilience.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive so far. I feel like I'm starting to see the world through a whole new lens, one that acknowledges the power of randomness and the limitations of our own knowledge. But before we wrap things up, I'm curious to hear more about what Taleb calls frenetic rules. What are those all about?
Those are fascinating. Frenetic rules are essentially practical, time-tested heuristics, rules of thumb that can help us navigate the fourth quadrant where traditional models and forecasting methods often fail us.
So they're like ancient wisdom for the modern world.
Exactly. They draw on the accumulated experience of generations who have faced uncertainty and found ways not only to survive, but to thrive in the face of it.
Okay, I'm sold. Give me some examples of these frenetic rules. I'm ready to start putting them into practice.
One of the most important frenetic rules is to avoid iatrogenics.
Iatrogenics. That
Yeah.
sounds a little intimidating.
It's a medical term that refers to harm caused by medical treatment. But in a broader sense, it can refer to any situation where an intervention actually makes things worse instead of better.
Oh, I've definitely experienced that in my own life. Sometimes trying to fix something just creates a whole new set of problems.
Exactly. And in the context of complex systems, iatrogenics can be especially dangerous.
Mhm.
When we try to intervene in a system we don't fully understand, we can trigger unintended consequences, sometimes with disastrous results.
This makes me think about all those government policies that were supposed to help the economy, but ended up making things worse.
Right. That's why a key frenetic rule is to be very cautious about intervening in complex systems,
Yeah.
especially when the potential for black swans is high.
So sometimes the best course of action is to just step back and let the system self-correct.
Exactly. And that can be a hard pill to swallow, especially for those in positions of power who, feel like they need to be seen as doing something.
Yeah, it's much easier to take credit for a success than to admit that sometimes doing nothing is the best solution.
Very true. But it's important to remember that inaction doesn't equal ignorance.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the limits of our knowledge and the potential for unintended consequences.
Okay, so avoid iatrogenics is one frenetic rule. What are some others?
Another important one is to avoid optimization.
Wait, isn't optimization a good thing? Don't we always want to be striving for the best possible outcome?
In a simple, predictable environment, yes.
Hmm.
But in a complex system, optimization can actually make us more fragile.
Okay, how can striving for the best actually make us worse off?
When we optimize for a specific set of conditions, we become highly specialized and lose our ability to adapt to changing circumstances.
Okay.
And in a world, shaped by black swan events, adaptability is key.
It's like that saying that the specialist knows more and more about less and less.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While specialization can be valuable in certain contexts, it can also make us incredibly vulnerable when the unexpected happens.
Right.
Remember, in the fourth quadrant, we need to prepare for a range of possibilities, not just optimize for a single outcome.
So what's the alternative to optimization?
Embracing redundancy.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to be the absolute best at one thing, it's better to have a broader range of skills and knowledge to be a jack of all trades, so to speak.
So it's like having multiple backup systems. If one fails, you've still got others to fall back on.
Precisely. And this principle applies not just to individuals, but
No.
to organizations as well. Companies that are too specialized,
Hmm.
too optimized for a particular market or product are more likely to fail when the environment changes.
That makes me think about all those companies that were once, industry giants, but then got disrupted by new technologies or, shifting consumer preferences.
Right.
Yeah.
And often their downfall wasn't due to incompetence, but rather a lack of adaptability. They were too focused on doing what they'd always done and failed to adapt to the changing landscape.
So it sounds like the key takeaway here is that it's better to be pretty good at a lot of things than to be the absolute best at only one thing. Having a wider range of skills and knowledge helps us, navigate an uncertain world.
Absolutely. And that's especially important in the fourth quadrant, where the potential for those black swans is high.
Right.
When the unexpected happens, it's the adaptable and resourceful individuals and organizations that are most likely to not only survive but to thrive.
This is all incredibly insightful. It's a lot to take in, but I'm feeling energized by these ideas.
It's definitely a shift in perspective,
Yeah.
but it's a powerful one. Taleb isn't suggesting that we give up on planning or striving for goals.
Mhm.
He's advocating for recognizing the limits of prediction,
Mm.
becoming more adaptable to the inevitable curveballs that life throws our way.
This deep dive has honestly made me less afraid of the unknown and more excited about the possibilities that come with accepting that we can't predict everything.
That's it. That's a great way to look at it. Embracing uncertainty can be liberating.
Yeah.
It allows us to be more open to new experiences and opportunities.
Well, on that note, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the Black Swan. We've explored the limits of prediction, the importance of anti-fragility, those frenetic rules, and the dangers lurking in the fourth quadrant. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and while we've learned a lot, I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear some practical takeaways.
Right, right.
How can they apply these ideas to their own lives?
You're absolutely right. We've got one more segment to go where we'll distill some of the most important takeaways and leave you with some provocative thoughts to ponder as you navigate your own complex and unpredictable world. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Nassim Taleb's The Black Swan.
Where we've been exploring this unpredictable nature of the world and how to, not just survive, but
Yeah.
actually thrive in the face of uncertainty.
It's been quite a journey. We've covered a lot of ground. The limits of prediction, the power of anti-fragility, the dangers of the fourth quadrant,
Right.
and those fascinating frenetic rules.
And now, as promised, let's try to distill some key takeaways from all this
Okay.
and leave our listener with some thought-provoking ideas to ponder.
All right. So if we accept that black swan events are inevitable,
Right.
then how do we approach, decision making, risk taking, or even just living our lives in general?
One of the, I think, most important takeaways is to kind of shift our focus from trying to predict the future to preparing for a wide range of possibilities.
So instead of getting fixated on what's going to happen,
Yeah.
we should be asking, what if?
Precisely. And this requires a healthy dose of humility,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that, we don't have all the answers
Mm-hmm.
and that the future is inherently uncertain. This is what Taleb calls epistemic humility,
Okay.
being aware of the limits of our own knowledge.
I think that's a concept that resonates with a lot of people. We live in a world where, everyone claims to be an expert,
Right.
but true expertise often lies in recognizing what you don't know.
Absolutely. And Taleb is pretty critical of those who cling to, outdated models and theories,
Mhm.
even when the evidence contradicts them. He calls them empty suits.
Okay.
They might look the part, but their knowledge is superficial.
And he argues that these empty suits are often the ones who do the most damage when those black swans hit, because they've kind of lulled people into this false sense of security.
Right. They make people believe that the world is more predictable and controllable than it actually is.
So how do we combat this epistemic arrogance? How do we cultivate more humility in ourselves and in society as a whole?
One way is to embrace a more empirical approach,
Okay.
to constantly test our assumptions against real world evidence and be willing to change our minds when we're proven wrong.
Taleb calls this skeptical empiricism,
Yeah.
combining a healthy skepticism with rigorous data analysis. It's about demanding evidence while remaining open to new information.
Exactly. And this applies to, so many areas of life: personal finance, politics, scientific research, anywhere where decisions are being made based on assumptions about the future.
It's a balancing act, right?
Yeah.
Being both open-minded and critical, especially in a world, saturated with information. It's easy to get swept up in all the hype and the speculation.
You're absolutely right. So we need to be more humble, more empirical in our thinking.
Yeah.
What else can we do to prepare for those black swans?
Well, we've talked a lot about embracing redundancy.
Yes.
Building in those backup systems, those safety nets, so we're not completely wiped out when the unexpected happens.
Yes. This is where that barbell strategy comes in.
Right.
Having a solid foundation of stability while also being open to taking calculated risks.
It's about not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Diversifying your skills, your investments, even your exercise routines.
Taleb is a big advocate for mixing those intense bursts of activity with longer periods of rest and recovery.
Right, just like that barbell strategy in weightlifting.
Exactly. And he argues that this approach is actually more aligned with our evolutionary history as humans. We evolved to alternate between periods of intense effort, like hunting or gathering,
Right.
and periods of rest and relaxation.
It's an interesting perspective that challenges, a lot of our modern ideas about productivity and constant striving.
Yeah.
So maybe instead of always pushing ourselves to the limit,
Yeah.
we should be incorporating more variability into our lives. A little bit of stress and challenge,
Right.
followed by periods of recovery and reflection.
It's about building resilience by embracing the natural ebb and flow of energy and effort. And this applies not just to individuals, but to organizations and even societies as a whole.
This makes me think about how we often try to, create this perfectly stable and predictable environment,
Right.
but in doing so, we might actually be making ourselves more fragile in the long run.
That's a great insight. Those well-intentioned policies that aim to smooth out the business cycle or create a risk-free financial system might actually be setting us up for even larger and more devastating black swan events down the line.
So sometimes a little bit of volatility and uncertainty might actually be a good thing. It keeps us adaptable and prevents us from becoming complacent.
That's the idea. It's counterintuitive, but sometimes a bit of chaos can be healthy.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive.
Yeah.
I feel like we've only scratched the surface of Taleb's ideas.
There's definitely a lot more to explore in the black swan.
Yeah.
But I think we've highlighted some of the most important takeaways.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately Taleb's message is a hopeful one.
I agree. He's not saying that we should give up and surrender to this unpredictable nature of the world. He's encouraging us to embrace it,
Right.
to learn from it, and to use it to our advantage.
It's about recognizing that we can't control everything, but we can control how we respond to what life throws at us. And that by cultivating humility, embracing redundancy, and building those anti-fragile systems, we can not only survive, but thrive in this world of black swans.
Beautifully put. It's about turning uncertainty from a source of fear into a source of opportunity.
So for you listening, as you go out into the world, remember the lessons we've discussed.
Question your assumptions, challenge the so-called experts, and don't be afraid to experiment.
Embrace those unexpected detours, and remember that sometimes the greatest opportunities are found in the most unexpected places.
And most importantly, never underestimate the power of a well-placed barbell strategy.
This has been your deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring.
And remember, in a world of black swans, the only certainty is uncertainty.